Hi, my name's Jeff Rhodes, and this is a video about Office 365 based on my book, Creating Business Applications with Office 365's Techniques in SharePoint, PowerApps, Power BI, and more. So this video is actually a follow-on from a pretty extended example I did in the book where we took a SharePoint list as our data source. So we'll start with that. And you see it's now up to almost 3,000 tickets. Most of them resolved, and but we've got some new tickets. These are some of the ones that I've just been building. We'll see these as we go along, but I don't build them here. We've got our own applications in PowerApps, and what I want to cover in this one is a new one that I built. But to give a little context, so we originally had a kiosk app, and that's still active in our help desk that users could go in, and at that time not all of them had Office 365 accounts, so you could go in and either pick yourself if you're Office 365 or just put your first name, last name, and so forth in there. Since that time now everybody has an Office 365 account, so that we could go in and do some more things. So there's also a ticketing application for the technicians where they can see these tickets and then close them out, add notes, assign a technician, and that kind of thing. But what was missing was the ability for the user to see his or her own tickets and to add the tickets themselves, right from their desk, from now or telework, from home, from your mobile device, anywhere you need a ticket. And we've also expanded the number of organizations. So original help desk, we've got another help desk that helps with classrooms and projectors and so forth. And then another one for some consulting help and that kind of thing. So let me show it to you and then we'll go through. And there'll actually be two videos on this. One, I'm just going to do a whole video just on how to get past the limit of the 2,000 maximum records. You saw we're over 2,000, closer to 3,000, so there's some challenges there. We're eventually going to archive some of those, but then this video just kind of show how this is put together. So here's the app. As far as it goes in, it knows who I am. These are open tickets. Notice how it's color coded. This one's been open a long time. And here's some of our test tickets. So right now it's doing the default where only my open tickets are showing. And I can click on each one and get some information. If I want to show the old tickets that have already been finished, I do the resolved ones. You can see I'm color coded that it's been resolved, that it's only been open 0 days and so forth. We can toggle by date and go in. We can search either the description or the notes. So if I search for, let's go to this one and then I'll just search for bad news. You can see it. If I scroll down, it's getting that text right there. So that's the way this one works. And then if the user has to open a new ticket, we come over to new ticket and we come in and put some info in here, pick a department. Notice, by the way, that this field's still saying we fill out all mandatory information, and the minute that I've added everything, right now I still need a description. And you see as I started typing in there, it goes away. I also can add an attachment. So I want to take a photo here. Let's do a graduate, do this one. And we can submit it in multiple attachments if we want to. So we come in here and submit ticket. Now, one of the challenges, and I'll cover this more in the other video, is that what happens when we add this ticket to SharePoint, there's a flow that adds a value in the other column. It basically takes the ID, which is a number, but in SharePoint it's not treated as a number, and we copy it over to this column, which is a numeric column, and then our magic that we do to read all of our records can go. But because of that, and it's actually a little slow right now, saving up this ticket, it may not have done all that by the time we reload the previous page. We'll see that in a second. Okay, so we see what we've done is we have this text that you may need to refresh several times before you're new ticket is displayed. And you'll see I didn't even really reload my things yet. It was easier to go ahead and show this message right away, and then watch when I hit continue, it's going to refresh all our tickets, and we'll see if that new one shows up. But it's one of those things that really don't need to look at the ticket right when they put it in anyway, and it's because of the delay. So yeah, you can see that it's not showing all of them. Oh yeah, let's see, it remembered my bad news, so I should take that out and see if it, yeah, so it actually did in this case pick that one up, but it may not be there. So that's the application. Let's go ahead and close that here. I've already opened it up in edit mode, and I really just wanted to kind of show you the way it's put together and go from there. So first, let's look at our data sources. So if we come over here, let me zoom in a little bit. You can see I've got these data sources that I added. So the Office 365 users is so that we can do things like the photo and get who I am. Outlook, as you might imagine, is to send email, and then we linked into that custom list, the help tickets list that has all our data. The rest of these collections and so forth are used to get our hands on all the tickets. So we'll cover those in a different video. So real quick, things like grabbing our the photo, we just use our user function, which comes out of this Office 365 users, and get the image. We get the full name. If we go into the app startup, I'll zoom in on that. We set a global variable, current email, and we're going to use the email value of our user. We're also going to start using this this other custom variable to show new record message. You might remember when I showed the example that we had that pop-up gray box that says your ticket has been submitted, and we want to show that when we come back from our new ticket screen. So we're going to make sure initialize it here to false so that that dialog doesn't show up right now and it only shows up later. That's what we're doing there. So I don't love this next technique, but we had a lot of places where we wanted to reload our collection. We want to refresh the data source and reload our collection. We want to do it. It could be either on start or on visible. I decided to go on visible so that we could have the opportunity to run it when we come back. We want to do it when we click refresh. And like I mentioned, we want to do it when we close that pop-up dialog. So I put it all in this load collection button. You see it's hidden here. I've got the visible property set as false. So let's look at that code. And like I said, most of this we'll cover in our other video, but I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and we'll get the relevant part for our purposes here. Whoops, do it again. So let's look at that. So this is the name of my collection that's got all my data in it. I'm going to filter it. The help tickets. This first part is what we do to get all of our records. I'll cover that later. But then we put this one here. So we're just going to say we've got a user column in there. User parentheses Office 365. And then we get its email property, and then that ones that are equal to the current email. And that was the variable I set on the way in. So this gives me just my own tickets. Gets rid of everybody else's tickets. Now, like I said, I want to call that in various places. So how do I do that? So let's look at it. First, I'm going to call it on the onVisible of the form. So you'll see I'll have a little bit of logic though, because I'm going to say if my show new records message is true, then I'm just going to do nothing, which is false. Otherwise, I'm going to select that load collection button. So it's kind of like those of us used to use, Visual Basic, or I used to do something called Toolbook. We used to be able to do something like send click to that button, which is a hopeless spaghetti of code. So it'd be really nice at some point if PowerApps can do a module or a class library where we could put this common function rather than having to call a button. But that was a lot of code, so we don't want to duplicate it. So that's what's going on there. Another place where that's used is in the refresh. So you see all we do on the refresh is call that same button, the code that goes through. All right, let's look at the rest of this form. So we've got our a checkbox of show and resolve tickets. We've got a search box. But where we come in now is let's look at the gallery. So one thing that's a little bit of a challenge when you do it this way is the Canvas apps. What this is, the bigger ones, you got to build it from scratch. Whereas if you use the wizard, it gives you the smaller footprint, but it puts a lot of the logic in. So I had to come in here and go insert and do a blank gallery and then kind of link it up. So if we go in there, you'll see the first thing we do is we pick a data source. So that's that user tickets collection. And when you do that, then it gives you access to the different fields. And so, I put some labels in, but notice this guy is an HTML text because it's got formatted text. And if you just put it in a label, you'll see all the div tags and that kind of stuff. So same thing for the notes down here. In the category, I just made bold. This guy's got a little more logic, so it's our status. But what I wanted to do, you might remember it had different colors. So if I look at the color here, so we just check for the status value. So if it's resolved, because we have a couple different flavors of resolved. If it's resolved is in there, then we make it dark green, otherwise it's black. And so we can give, make it green is good and so forth. Let's look at the number of days open. So that has a little bit of logic on dates. And so again, we're going to look at the resolved, whether it's been as a resolved status, but it has to do with our math. So if it's resolved, we look at a column that we have in our list called the resolved date and make sure that we do the math from the resolved date to the created date. We don't look at today's date because this could have been resolved 6 months ago. But if it's not resolved, which is in the else over here, then we do the logic where the date diff between now and the created date. So we can say, hey, this thing's just counting up. And that's why the one that we see there is, 220 or 235 days because we've never closed it. And so it's been going that way. All right, so the other thing that's related to that, let's look at the color. And so even more logic here. So we look at this status again. If it's resolved, no matter how long it took, we just make it green. So that's the dark green. And then we got a little more logic because it depends on what kind of ticket it is. That's where we look at the issue category. So we've got something called remedy where we send it to another help ticketing system, or SIPs, which is like projects. And so if either of those, we give ourselves 30 days until we turn it red. So that's what we do this date diff. If it's greater than 30, then we turn it red. Otherwise, if it's not one of those, we only give ourselves 7 days. That's why it's got 7. So a little bit of fun there. So that pretty much covers the left side. Actually, I guess there's one more interesting thing. Let's go back in. I learned this from my colleague Anthony. It's kind of nice to set it so that the whole background color is a different color, so you can really tell that it's selected. So we go to the template, fill, and we just do a little logic here. We say, okay, if it's selected, give me one color. And notice how I use the transparency so that make it a little lighter. Otherwise, it's just completely white. So that way, when it's selected, we can see the whole thing. And because otherwise, you can't necessarily look at it and tell which one is actually selected. And then the other one that's kind of nice, oh yeah, I guess that was all I did there. So let's go over on the right side. To do that, we had to insert a display form. And what you do with that, let's go click on it, is you match it up to your data source. The minute you do that, it gives you all the fields, and then you can edit the ones that you want. So I was just concerned with the ones that the user wanted to see. Description, And the ones that are custom, by the way, are the ones that I've unlocked, and I'll show you that in a minute. And we basically, if you want to put a different kind of control in there, you want to unlock them, and it turns it into a custom form, or a custom card, which is the part within there. And I made it a single column over here so that it all wasn't all squished together. So why did I unlock them? Let's just see how you do unlock them. You come over here and you go to Advanced, and then you click this Unlock to change properties. So if you have to do anything special. So in this case, I had to unlock it because, like we talked about earlier, I needed to put an HTML text in there so that it would show formatted, not all the tags. And it did the same thing on the notes. Another one I unlocked was the resolve date, because I didn't want different areas for all of our dates. So like, oh, let's just call it dates, and then we'll put in the created date. And the created date has a little bit of interest in it, because when you first show it, it has the time as well, and we don't want that. So we want to just use this text function. So we pass in the date, and then we tell it how we want to format it as a short date, and that pulls off the time, which is kind of nice. And then the resolved, we can get to it by saying parent.default, because this is the one that's linked up to the card itself. But we want to check if it's blank or not, and if it's blank, then we just say NA rather than just leaving it blank or empty. And then you just pull over the same field from over here, the number of days, with the color and everything else, because we want to do that same logic. And when we saw those attachments, we put those in. Let's run that for a minute, see if I can see the attachments. Yeah, so there's like an attachment, and I think another one that I did. Oh, that one doesn't have attachment, but you can come in and view them that way. All right. So that pretty much covers, oh, there was one more thing I did want to cover on that form. So you put the data source in, and then you may miss this if you're used to building it in the wizard, but see how you have to put what the item is. And so it's the name of the gallery dot selected, and that's when you change the selection on the left, it updates all the information on the right. And one other minor change that I don't really like, by default, these are all indented a little bit, and so everything's not lined up. So I go through and get rid of the padding left so that all the stuff's lined up under each other. I just think it looks a little bit better. All right, so what do we do on the new ticket? So that's the last part of this, is first of all, I just create a button, and we're going to navigate to a new screen. So we did a new screen over here, just blank, and then started adding stuff to it. So we can go over there and look at it. This one, if you've read the book, you'll see it's similar to the kiosk app that I covered in that book, except that one had, as I mentioned earlier, you can say you're Office 365 or not, and then type your name in. But here we know who they are. We're already logged in, so we don't have to ask them. We ask them the phone, department. We ask them what support group they're in there. Notice how that works. You come in and this is the data source, the list. This is the name of the column, and then we use the choices command. But I didn't use that on department, because department, I didn't want to, I'm afraid they wouldn't ever change it. And so I want to leave it blank and then check to see if they did it. And whereas this one, I'm good on defaulting it. So on the department, we just gave them a list of choices instead, rather than linking it to there. And then the descriptions is a HTML text, or I think a rich text actually, that they put in here. And main thing I did there is just to make the font a little bit bigger, since we do have lots of real estate. We'll cover this attachments in a second, but let's go look at this field. So we type some text in, make it red, but where the logic comes in here is in the visible property. So we basically just go in and check, okay, what's required in this case, and if it's required, anything that's not there, if it's blank, then we set the visible to true, otherwise we set it to false. And then what's kind of nice, when we get to the submit button, we can just check for the visible there rather than doing through all this logic of the things that need to be in there. And let's go talk about the attachment. So the attachments was harder. I mean, it turned out to be relatively easier to do, but it's a little more convoluted than I expected. First thing I expected is to be able to go insert here and look for attachments block, and it turns out not to be there. And then what I did is try to add my own form and then copy. It turns out if your data source is SharePoint and some other kinds, then it'll give you an attachment, control. But then if you put it in here, it doesn't work right when we try to load it up. So the way you actually have to do it is you have to come up here and add an edit form, link it up to our list, and then make the only field that you show attachment. So I'll show you that. So I got this form and I linked it to help tickets. If I go to edit field, the only thing I put in there was attachments, and I customized it mainly so that I could move the label to the left to make it look like this. Now, one thing you got to watch is when you reset the form, like to get rid of the attachments, you'll see like in a minute when we cancel the form, or even when we submit it, we don't want to come back in and still have the old attachment. Let's say the person was going to enter multiple tickets all at one time. When we reset it, with the documentation says it turns it back into display mode. So you'll see on the way into this screen on the visible property, I come in and set that to the mode to new so that we're sure it's a new one. So 2 more buttons. We'll go through the cancel and then the longer one on the submit. So on the cancel, pretty straightforward. We just reset all of our controls. And we want to do that again so that they're empty if they come back in and do a new ticket. And then there's that reset form where we clear out our attachments and then we navigate back to our ticket screen. Okay, notice we're not setting any variables here because when they cancel, they just go in. We don't want to show our dialog. We just want to go back into how it was. All right, our last one is the submit button. So we'll spend a little bit more time with that. We'll just go through it in stages here. So first thing we do, we check that required values label. If it's visible, we just don't do anything because they haven't put in all the mandatory information. And then we use this great thing called patch. So we patch our data source, which is that SharePoint list, and we tell it to put in the defaults of there. So any columns there or other things that have a default will get added in, and then we just add in the stuff that we have from our form. Anything else uses the default. So this is the column name here, and this is the control, the value that we want to put in it from our form. So we'll put in the phone number, the department, the description. Notice that's the HTML text we're putting. And then we had something called an issue, which we ended up taking off the form, but we want it in SharePoint. So I just turn it to plain text and take the first 50 characters. And then this next bit is to make a person column inside of SharePoint. So it's, you basically just have to look at the documentation. But notice how we use that user object again. So we get the email and we get the display name. I can scroll down there a little bit better so we can see all that. That's not the prettiest thing, but notice we put the display name, the email, and then we're not putting in the department, the job title, and all that. And then finally we put the support organization. And then this kind of key here. So remember, all we do with the form is we just pass it its updates. And since the only thing we have in there is attachments, that's enough to get it to load up the attachments up to our SharePoint list item. So that's actually, fairly straightforward there at the end. All right, let's go down to the next section. So we're going to set our record message. Remember, that's a variable that when we come back, when it's true, we're going to skip our loading of our collection and we're going to show that dialog. So we'll set that, and then notice each of these semicolons is just new commands. So this next bit here is really just for us to use one set of email code for our 3 organizations. So remember, we had CFAM, TAC, DFIT. So we got 3 groups. So I'm going to put that in a variable called support org right there. And then I'm going to do an if and basically have a corresponding email address for each one. And then I'll come down, we'll scroll down a little bit more and look at the actual email. All right, so this is where we use that Outlook. Whoops, do it again. There we go, a little better. So we use that Outlook. So we're going to send email, and this is the email address. This is the subject, so we use our variable. And then this is the body of the email. Hey, you have a new ticket. We're going to see down below that it's HTML email, so that's why we'll use those break and the strong and so forth. I'm going to say what the user is. And then I'm using a little, this is like a replace command. They call it substitute here. You can call it substring, or is kind of similar, where we're going to, this is our Office 365 email, and we have a corresponding email that's a little bit different, so we can swap out one part for the other. And we put what department, we tell them what the description is. And then kind of a weird thing in PowerApps is it puts it by default as low priority email. So we want to put it as normal, or we could have even done high priority. And then finally, we come over and do basically the same thing we did in the cancel button. So we come in here and go in and reset everything and navigate back to the first screen. So by this time we've loaded up the SharePoint list, and going to go back to the first screen, show our little dialog that's gray that says your ticket's been submitted, and go from there. And this false down at the bottom is basically saying if the required values label was visible, then don't do anything. So lots of stuff coming up on a half an hour, so I'm sure you've had plenty of information, hopefully, for this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel if this is helpful to you. Pick up the book if you haven't, and send me some comments, and let me know what else you'd like to see. Like I said, I will put another video on that talks about just the collection, how to read all the tickets. So I hope this is useful, and have a great day.